Today I'm continuing to talk about my project supported by Adobe Residency Community Fund, and I'm going to talk about one of the covers I developed as a part of this project, as a part of my larger initiative called And Then You Read. In the first video I talked about what this is gonna be, and in this video I'm gonna walk you through creation of a cover for Poker by Zora Neale Hurston that was made with Illustrator for iPad. So first question is, why did I choose this book? And I talked briefly about the process of selecting the covers for this project in the previous introductory video, but going more into detail, Poker is a play. It's a play that was written in 1931 by Zora Neale Hurston, who was a part of the Harlem Renaissance movement and one of the more prominent women writers that were working as a part of that movement and were living in Harlem, which is where I am based right now. And you know, that movement has a lot of interest for me personally, and it's also something that I don't have a lot of knowledge about, so I'm always eager to learn more about Zora Neale Hurston and other Harlem Renaissance artists and writers and educators. This is her, and there's not that many photos of her, but these are some of the ones that I love, that I found very beautiful. And she was born in Alabama in the South under Jim Crow, and she passed away again in a relative obscurity and poverty down in Florida, but she wrote a few of the books that are considered, you know, one of the masterpieces of Harlem Renaissance. There is a lot of controversy around it, but the heritage, you know, the books that she left are of a lot of interest, not just to people who are interested in Harlem Renaissance, people who are interested in Black American and African American culture, and people who are interested in anthropology and a lot of other things. So first thing I always do when I design a cover for any book is I read the book. I think that that's, you know, that's your starting point. That's where all of your ideas are supposed to be coming from. That's where all of your ideas and all your visual concepts need to be tied to. You know, this is a pretty short play. It was never staged, and it was never published during the lifetime of Zora Neale Hurston. So as far as, you know, studying the book and studying the impact that the book had, there isn't that much in there. So obviously going to the original source, to the text itself, is really the only few things that I can do here. You know, it's a play that takes place in most likely in Harlem, in something called the Shotgun House, where 5 men are playing poker, and they're playing making bets with starting with $1 or $2 and raising it, and that was a lot of money. The play is set in around 1930, 1931, which means it's happening in the middle of the Great Depression, which had big impact in New York City. Zora Neale Hurston was based in New York City at the time, so she knew what she was writing about, and she also knew a lot about African American Southern culture. There is some clues that tell us that these men are black. These men are a part of probably a gang, or you know, they all carry guns. So you know, it's just one game of poker, and in the end, it turns out that all of them have had cards up their sleeve, so they try to cheat their way out of it to get the money that's at stake, and in the end they all kill each other. That's a big spoiler. And I think there is a lot to unpack, and I tried to use, you know, all the resources I had to do it. After I've read the book and during the time that I was reading the book, the thing that I like to do always is make notes, just to record some phrases, some words, locations, specific descriptors, but also moods, characters, and what I feel like, what characters feel, what characters are experiencing. And this is that list. It's pretty short, again, because the play itself is pretty short. It's, you know, it's about a game of poker. There is a lot of talk of it being in a dark room. It's about desperation. It ends in death. They talk about having razors. They talk about having knives. And they end up shooting each other. There is a woman, Dulcie, who comes in for only a brief moment in the play, and she says, you know, you shouldn't be doing this, basically, but none of the men listen to her. And that's how it ends, and it has a lot of also evocation of sin and deadly sin and devil and going to hell. So after I've read the book itself, I also want to study the context, the precedent, and the legacy. It's what influenced the book, what is it received, what is some scholarly thought behind it. With the poker, there's a few things to study. So first of all, there have been no previous covers of it executed, which is both great and not so great. It's great because I have a chance to interpret it for the first time, and you know, I have browsed and I haven't found no illustrations or no kind of previous visualizations of it. It hasn't really been staged that I know of. There's no photos of the production, so it's almost a clean slate that I could do, you know, take a stab at without having any previous references, which is not really common, especially with classic works like this one. But I do have as a reference things like other Zora Neale Hurston's books that were published and that they had covers executed, especially the first editions. So it's always nice as a part of the book design process to look at first editions, to look at I look at typography, patterns, illustrations, color, and the one with the stripes is very striking and very interesting. I really like the typography for Dust Tracks on a Road, which was her autobiography. There's a lot of green, there's a lot of red and brown and ochre and kind of beige colors. Then, you know, there's the first editions of Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is her probably most famous work. So it's always illuminating to look at all the covers for these and see what I can derive from this. And it is my belief that when you're designing a cover in a contemporary context, you should study the other covers that came before, and you should be aware of, you know, what that book looked like before, or what kind of reputation did this author have from the other book covers. If you're breaking the rule, if you're making it look like it came from a different era, that it's contemporary, there should always be an explanation for that. There should be a reason. Obviously, in like real market conditions, the market and marketing behind the book, and you know, the reason why you're making a new edition, a lot of that is dictated by marketing reasons. Whereas in this case, where I'm doing something for a personal project, I'm just, you know, trying to do as good of a job as I possibly can to convey what this book is about. And that for me involves studying when it was written, when it was published, what kind of, you know, historic period is it referencing. So for this book that's written in 1931, that is pretty important for me to, you know, be clear. I think that it was written in 1931 because that is one of the key defining features of that story, and it would not happen at any other time. So obviously it's very important to reference the Harlem Renaissance for me, because that is the time that this book was shaped by. And I looked at the photography that's available from that time, and I looked at awnings, and I looked at demonstrations and rallies, photography of that. There's also this incredibly famous nightclub map of Harlem, which was drawn by Elmer Sims in 1933, a few years later, and it has this very recognizable illustration and color scheme and typography. So for me, that came to mind right away when I was gathering some Harlem Renaissance references. I looked at you know, what is a shotgun house, because I didn't know what this was before, and the book, the play references it as a setting, and so I found out that it's a structure that came from the South, particularly from Louisiana, and even specifically from New Orleans, where it was this very narrow buildings facing the street at the street level, but they were incredibly narrow and small and dark, and usually were associated with poor neighborhoods. So there aren't any shotgun houses left in New York City, but I was trying to pull some historic reference of what they could have been. I don't know if these are 100% accurate. And then the second thing is, I don't necessarily say that when I do research, all of the research will be relevant. It's kind of inevitable that you'll find some things that you do find relevant, but you'll find some things that you don't find relevant, and that's okay, and it's fine, and it's inevitable, because you'll only be able to find things that inspire you and that are relevant to your project if you go through a wide range of things. So I'm showing a lot of the things or types of what I was looking at. And then obviously it's when you think about New York, any area of New York in 1931, you always have the context of it being the Great Depression. So I looked at the work of some illustrators and artists who depicted the Great Depression in New York. Seymour Fogel, who was a white illustrator, but as you can see, he depicted some of the effects of the Great Depression on Black American. Other artists and illustrators such as Miller Cheats, Stuart Davis, Claire Leighton, all of them were white again, but it's interesting to see how they depicted this in the order that I found them. Vinod Race was a German immigrant who lived in Harlem, and he was actually pretty influential in, you know, getting some of the artists of the Harlem Renaissance to the places where they could express them better. And you know, he was one of the people who influenced the movement, and these patterns and the illustration that he was doing was very interesting. This is also the time when some of the Art Deco lettering and still, you know, Art Nouveau and arts and crafts, all of those movements coming from Europe were influenced in the way that typography looked. And you know, you would see later on how, you know, this lettering became pretty popular in Harlem in the 20s and 30s. It's very, very recognizable. A and S, and these are some of the covers and some of the posters that Winnold Race has done. Then obviously I looked at the artists of Harlem Renaissance and the artists who were African American who influenced art movements during this era, which includes Jacob Lawrence. Of course, he is the most famous for his migration series. He's originally from New Jersey, but he lived in New York throughout this whole time period, and the color palettes and the way that he depicts Black Americans are incredibly influential, and you could see that there is a lot of red and beige and brown and yellow in his work. Alan Rohan Cright was a Bostonian, an artist based in Boston, but some of his paintings, I think, are also very evocative and very reminiscent of this era, 20s and 30s, in, you know, on the East Coast. And he had some exhibits in New York as well during that time. And then, you know, one of the most important references here would be Aaron Douglas, of course, who is one of the leading figures of Harlem Renaissance, and visually who helped to shape this movement in a massive way. And he studied under Winnold Rice, who I referenced before, and the color palettes, his visual language, his illustration, and also his lettering and his graphic design were of tremendous influence. And you know, the book covers that he's done and the magazine covers and the interior designs are iconic for this time period. And you can see, you know, that lettering style that's being influenced at the same time by you know, European and American introduction of Art Deco shapes and Art Deco type and lettering. Here you could see it also flourish and shift and change forms, but still be very recognizable with this exaggerated counters with the P and R and different letters. The bottom left is a cover of the magazine Fire with 2 exclamation points, which was a literary magazine during the Harlem Renaissance, where Zora Neale Hurston published some of her work, actually. It was very short-lived, but this masthead is tremendously influential for this project. And yeah, I just really love this work, the use of counters, the use of kind of pattern language, and the use of the lettering comes across, you know, very powerful. So from that we can start deriving some of our lettering and color references and how that felt like. And then Alma Thomas, who is a very highly acclaimed and a brilliant artist, but she's mostly associated with Washington DC and, you know, the abstract movements of 50s and 60s. That's where she reached the most prominence, and that's where she was most influential. But in fact, when I did some research on her, it turned out that her career and Zora Neale Hurston career went kind of in parallel a little bit, where they both went to Howard University, which is a historically black college in DC, and then they both were in Harlem because Alma Thomas went to Teachers College, and Zora Neale Hurston went to Barnard and then Columbia. And then when she was at Barnard, she was the first and only black student at Barnard. And I don't think that they've ever crossed paths, but it's kind of interesting how both of them were this African-American female figures that, you know, went to the same schools and lived in the same neighborhoods and had such distinct impact on the culture of the time. Yeah, and then obviously the book is about a game of poker, so I had to study a little bit of that, and I like pulling visual references because obviously these are key for me developing visual content, and you know, design of decks of cards, the way that, you know, you would use you could use a green color, you could use a color of the chips, you could use the design of the chips, you can use the codes and you know, everything associated with that, the way that cards are handled in poker, and the different kind of gang and mafia related imagery connected to that, something I looked at. And I also tried to think of kind of historic precedents of how did they play poker in the 30s, how did they play poker in the late 20s, and Boardwalk Empire, the TV show, came to mind because it's about that era, but obviously these are rich people with a lot of influence, whereas the characters in poker are poor. They, you know, decided to kill each other over a few dollars of cash, so that's different, but still it was interesting to see the connection and the historic precedent for this. So after I studied the context and the precedent and the legacy of the book, I get to sketch my ideas based on what I discovered about the historic context, and also what I wrote down as a part of my list. And you know, I make really small thumbnail size sketches that tell me, you know, what's the composition of the piece is going to be like, what are my core ideas about what principles visually this can be organized around. I'm not looking at colors here, and I'm not looking at any fine detail. I'm just looking at really rough ideas of, you know, what could be the theme, what could this roughly look like or feel like, you know, and that's my starting point. It's always tremendously helpful, and in this case I made a lot more sketches than I usually do, because I just think that this is such a popular theme that's quite easy to generate versions of covers on, and you know, we could study so many different things. I really like that we have the exclamation point. It's not common that you would have an exclamation point as a part of the book title. And you know, that makes me think of that Fire magazine that I talked about a few minutes ago. And we have, you know, guns, we have cards, we have all kinds of symbols, you know, based around the card layouts of lettering that we could study. I also, you know, here as like a regular book, and as I mentioned in the intro, I presume that this cover will have the name of the author, the name of the book, and also the descriptor that says play or a play on it. So these are the typographic elements that I work with. And then, you know, I go into really trying to see how these will play out as digital sketches. So after I have those little thumbnail sketches, I can go to my computer, which in this case is an iPad Pro that runs Adobe Illustrator for iPad. So I do just that, and as I mentioned previously, all these books are gonna be the same size and the same dimension, so it's 6 by 9 inches. So I go create a file, and I start, with setting some type with the title of the book in it, and it's the main thing here is just to get all the components in. I don't care really what fonts it's in. It's not, not looking at that in detail. I'm just starting to generate kind of those little thumbnails that I did, by hand. I'm trying to turn them into computer sketches, which allow me to see in more detail, what this might feel like, what this might look like. I'm making some initial choices of the colors, which are not, final in any way, but I'm just trying to feel the vibe. And so I'm just generating all these different layouts, and like, what would that look like if it had the little cards on it, that had 6 cards lined up like this, and then we can take the letters and put them in on those cards to have them as the backs of the cards, or whatever that is called, and just see how that feels like. And I can tell at this point in time, whether that's gonna work or not work entirely, but I'm just generating those sketches, those rough kind of digital sketches, to just see how far I can get and see if I get any new ideas. I'm not rejecting anything, so as you can see, I'm just this is the layering is a little more challenging in the Illustrator for iPad, but basically, yeah, so I'm not deleting any sketches here that I made. I'm just keep copying those artboards, so then, at the end I have one file that has a lot of these different layouts that I can look at side by side to compare. So as I said, I really like this exclamation point, quite large, so I'm trying to make that into a metaphor about the massacre, the bloody shooting that this turns into at the end. So it's kind of like a little spoiler alert about what happens at the end of the book, but it's subtle enough. Like I'm not really showing guns, and then chips and other kind of more subtle references. What if this is more subtle? Then literally making it look as a card, but poker. The Texas Hold'em version that they're playing in the book has 5 cards, and poker as a word also has 5 letters, so that's quite helpful. And then I believe each player has 5 cards that they're holding, but then there's 6 players in the game, so that would be a total of 6 people sitting around the table. And I was trying to see if I could make the 6 card or 5 card thing work. So I'm just adding new ideas, and there's the typefaces selection. It's not anywhere near final or not close to what I want to be doing, but I'm just trying to kind of really quickly feel the vibe of what I want it to look like, and both the color wise and typography wise. And I like rotating letters, I like it being interesting, and here what I'm trying to do is evoking the idea that when you have card, it has elements rotated both ways, so you can look at it. It doesn't have one way to look at it, upside and down. You can look at it both ways, and that's what I'm trying to do in those ideas. I'm going towards this kind of dark gray and brown and greenish direction, because I just feel like, you know, this is a book about quite somber subject matter, and it's also clearly sad, and it depicts a time period in the history of, in American history, that was quite hard to get through. You know, like with this current economic crisis, you know, a lot of the art that you'd see that's about the Great Depression, it's not gonna be butterflies and rainbows. So I'm trying to convey the subject matter here with these ideas. And you know, it's really nice to have a short title of the book. So I'm putting more attention to the title of the book rather than the author's name, because it's easier, and I think it's cool, it's evocative, and it's something that directs, you know, a lot of these ideas. And this font here is by Oh No Type Foundry that I really like, and I think that it matches the time period pretty well. So you know, again, continuing with the ideas of things kind of being both ways, and the cards, and see if I can make some sort of card layout here that would work, make sense. And I'm trying different typefaces, and I'm trying different color combinations. You know, all of these right now are, you know, whatever is available through Adobe fonts. With my Creative Cloud subscription, I'm not going all out of my way to search for any references, because, you know, this is an initial stage that's pretty rough, as you can see, and it's just about getting these ideas out there and putting them all out there and just having them and being able to evaluate them. Yeah, and then, you know, I'm thinking about using this grid repeat feature. I'm thinking about the just the cards flying all over the place, and how that could work. And that makes me think of Alma Thomas's paintings, which are basically like textures with rectangles. So I quite like this one. And then I really like the shape of this exclamation point in this font, because it's kind of, the letters are kind of slab serif, but the exclamation point is has a round dot and is rounded. So making it red makes me again think about how it's evoking you know, the bloody incident that happened at the end of the book. So I quite like that. It almost looks to me like a sequence of bam, 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 and then everyone's dead. And so I like the exclamation point being at the end of this sequence of 5 letters. So I'm trying to create a sense of narrative here, sense of sequence, how, you know, any play would have sequence of events leading to the culmination. So making this last statement red makes a lot of sense to me. And I like always having the type on the side, especially if it's not, like, the wordplay is not really necessary, so you can leave it off if you don't find that it's helpful. But for scale purposes and for detail purposes, it's often really helpful to leave that in there. And so I'm trying to find a way for it to be kind of not a center of the composition, but kind of an auxiliary element that just gives it a little bit more variety and texture and scale. This idea with cards that seemed, you know, to make a bit of sense kind of when I was drawing it as a thumbnail in my sketchbook, but doesn't make that much sense to me now. Like I already know it as I'm making this, trying to figure out the gradients. You know, I'm not an illustrator, and that's one reason why I said that the covers would rely particularly and specifically on typography when I started this project. But nevertheless, you know, if something feels like a perfect fit, I'm not gonna not explore it, and I would always, you know, leave some room for exploration around the theme of, you know, whatever would work for this title the best. If an illustration works for this title the best, it's great. And then also using this grid repeat tool for the patterns, because this is very Art Deco-y. This is also very reminiscent of some of the patterns that were in the pictures of Zora Neale Hurston that I like. And there's always patterns on the backs of the suits of the cards, so maybe that could be something like that. And then, you know, we could use the metaphor for a poker table. There's no description of the poker table in the book, but, you know, what if I try to force it and say that it's round? The cool thing about this is that there are 6 players, and there's again 6 letters, including the exclamation point that I could use. So this is literally a metaphor for those people, those men sitting at that table. And all of these things are the ones that I'm trying to tap into. It's not necessarily going to be immediately obvious to someone who picks up the book or reads the book, because it's just not, but it's worth exploring. So then now I feel like I got all of my kind of key ideas, and I'm gonna narrow down. And as I was saying, I can already see which things are not really working that well. And on the right, I'm selecting the ideas that I think are working quite well or quite successful. Yeah, on the right. Then, you know, some of these are just not that strong, so looking at them side by side is always tremendously helpful to be able to think, you know, this is just not as strong as the other ones. If I only had like 5 of these, I would never know that. Yeah, so I can also, what I can do is I can, you know, look at these ideas in the context of what buckets they fall into, so I can basically narrow down buckets. There is this one bucket with you know, the letters flying around and the exclamation point, and random objects around it. So then there is one that shows a sequence ending with an exclamation point, just basically the same idea. Then there are these things that make the lettering look like it's cards, so I'm trying to integrate the exclamation point there, and again, you know, the exclamation point idea can be integrated into a lot of these again, and I'm recombining, and I'm basically just looking at a bunch of these ideas together to combine the best elements of them and say, you know, this is the better way of conveying the story, and this works and that doesn't. So what I'm ending up with is only a few ideas that I'm gonna move forward and refine. Speaking of typography here, I'm trying to find something that's a little bit more interesting that could work with this. And so ironically, after I tried this, I went back and looked at this font that I'm using here, which is called Stymie, and I found out that it was designed in literally the same year, 1931, that the book was written. So I find that you know, something like this, a slab serif, works pretty well in this case. You know, then I want to try a different pattern, and I want to, at this stage, evaluate my ideas and try to look at them a little bit to see that they really work before I really narrow down too much. And this grid repeat tool is pretty helpful to let you do this very quickly. I like the letters rotating, but you know, we have to balance legibility and contrast, and you know, making it not look like a mess. With the other ideas, I kind of find that I really love this one, but it's gonna be pretty tricky to make this work. But I'm trying, still seeing if it's gonna be better with less contrasty colors. It's something that's a little bit more subtle, and you know, distributing these cards more so that there's more space around them and you can read the silhouettes, read the figure-ground relationship a little bit better. Then I am trying to see with this one that everything is centered, to see, you know, how or where I could put this exclamation point, that it still reads as this idea. And I'm combining multiple typefaces, and that's fine, and still trying to kind of look at all of these options that I currently have on the table and see which one of them makes sense. Like, this is a neat cover and I like these colors. I think that it kind of misses the point a little bit, and you know, how dramatic the story is. Going through the fonts and seeing if I could have something that's a bit more Art Deco-y, and something that's more illustrative. And actually, you know, in this category, this is pretty cool. This is as cool as it goes. We can add a play in one act to balance out the other thing a little bit more. And then, you know, the green color doesn't quite work, I don't think. Here, again, looking at the different typography, here, you know, because there's a lot going on in the center, I want to make it a bit more subtle. It's a sans serif, and, you know, I do want to try to make the color of the cards not as obnoxious, and beige doesn't really make sense. There aren't really beige cards, so I just discarded that one option. And then I selected my design, and I'm gonna refine it. I think that just works the best from all the ones that I have. Yeah, so now this is a point where, you know, really look at everything in a lot more detail, and I set aside the original version that I have, and now I'm gonna do the lettering. And you know, it's this is all Illustrator on the iPad, and I had quite a learning curve trying to, you know, figure out how you would actually work this, because you know, it's quite different from the desktop version. But you know, this is only 5 letters and 1 exclamation point, so it's not too hard to make this work. Thankfully, it's pretty intuitive. If you know how to deal with Bezier curves, you would know how to do it here. So as a reminder, all the points are on the extrema, which means, you know, on the edges of the letter. For the letter like O, you're gonna have 2 points at the very left, very right, and then top and bottom, so you could see here. Then I'm deriving the other letters that have the straight lines. You know, the E is very easy, obviously. You have to compensate between your verticals and your horizontals by making your horizontals a little bit thinner, so that because our brain optically makes things that are vertical appear skinnier. Yeah, so what I'm doing this lettering, and I am referencing the things that I've seen before in the Harlem Renaissance lettering, but I am not directly, ripping anything off, or I'm not even really looking at it. I just have it in my mind, and I'm not tracing anything. I'm not copying anything directly. As you can see, there's nothing in the file or nothing on the artboard that I would reference, but I'm making it, to have slight contrast, to have exaggerated counters, and have these very recognizable diagonals, like the letter R. How do I make the letter K work with the R, and then making the exclamation point that is round, because I already determined that that's the one that is going to work better for my kind of my idea of having it be, red, evocative of blood splatter or something like that. There's a bit of refinement, I always try to take a little bit of a break and then get back to it. So then I'm doing a few options of, what I had in mind. Trying an E and, trying the K slightly different, double checking the thicknesses and the contrast at different points. Like I decided to make it a bit bolder here, and just trying to make sure that the R, the bowl, and the P looks kind of balanced, and the R is using the same bowl with a little bit of an adjustment, looking at the spacing between these 4 letters, because it's not a font, so nothing will tell you what the kerning should be, what the spacing, letter spacing is the more correct term, should be between them. And then, also, now that I have the lettering, I'm gonna try to place it, and you see, you don't really know how that would work until you take it out of that neat line and place it here. In the composition that I kind of came to already with a different font before, I'm trying color combinations that seem to me that would work. First of all, the black, white, and red are the colors, of the playing cards, so I use those. And then different shades of brown, looking at, thinking about the Aaron Douglas work and other, graphic designers' work of the era. This kind of minty color, I tried to see, what works best with the color combination of the red and black or dark brown. I gravitate to where it's brown, as I previously already mentioned, as a good reflection of this pretty drab and pretty dark era in the history of the city and the neighborhood. But also, Harlem Renaissance used brown a lot, so it's good again to be aware of that and make decisions on the color for a reason. So I tweaked the letters a little bit, and I'm replacing them here. I like this word play to be vertical, that is evocative of so many things. And then, I'm just looking at having the same margins around these 2 typeset elements, play and Zora Neale Hurston, the author's name at the bottom. Yeah, and then, going back to the cards, I was going to try something different, and the key driver behind the change in the pattern is that I don't want the cards to be overlapping the letters, because I feel like the letters are going to be much stronger, and the figure-ground relationship and the color relationship between the pattern and the letters will be much stronger if the cards don't touch the letters and they kind of go around. So that's what I'm trying to do here, making adjustments, and and I think it's cool because it works for the book with the cards flying left or right. You can imagine how, especially after they've started pulling cards, aces and everything up from up their sleeves. You know, there would be a lot more cards than the standard 56 or 54 card set. So they have, each of them had like 4 aces, which is impossible. But I think cards being all over the place and not being neatly arranged is a good metaphor for this. You know, usually you have the cards in threes, and you would lay them on the table, there is also kind of a good sequence element to it, with the letters and the cards around them, and everything culminating in this exclamation point. So now basically, you know, I'm trying to look at the color of the cards themselves and see if I can make something that kind of does stand out against the background but doesn't argue too much with the color of the letters. So what if the letters are white actually, so that there is more contrast, and the letters is the first thing you see, because inevitably, you know, you have to read the name of the book, and I'm already making it a little bit harder for everyone with the letters thrown around like this. So I'm always trying to try everything, any idea that comes to mind, but I can see instantly that the white colors for the cards themselves is not gonna work, and the red colors for the cards are not gonna work, because this is just getting too distracting. You're starting to pay attention to the pattern that should recede in the background. Then one of the things here is that I think that my cards are a little bit too big. And then I did a few passes where I made them smaller, and so now I'm also trying, and that scale change really helps, I think. I'm trying different colors like red and blue for the background to see if that's gonna be better, just in case, because until I test it, I don't really know. One thing here is that I think the card inside the O is distracting, so I'm gonna change that and remove that, and the lineup of 5 cards that I had before, it's a little distracting, so I'm gonna remove that also. I know that it's getting pretty close, and the relationship of the size is much better. Just trying to figure out more colors that I could do to see if that would be better. If adding more saturated color is better. And then I think that I pretty much landed on the version that I think would work best. This is how it turned out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with me, and I hope this was helpful. And we'll continue with the next title.